how's it going? Laura with Garden Answers. So in today's video, I want to talk about some of the brand new annuals that are coming out this year, 2020. We have done this video for I think the past 2 or 3 years, and it seems like there's a lot of excitement around new plants and new varieties. I know I'm certainly excited about it, but the coolest part about this year, I think for me, is that all of them I'm going to share with you today. There's 15 of them. I think I have personal growing experience with every single one. I was lucky enough to get my hands on these varieties last year, which, you know, when you make videos or if you're a garden blogger or writer, oftentimes we're able to get some of the newer plants early so that we can try them out and share our experience with you. And I just get so much more excited when I have actual experience growing these things. And I loved every single one of them I'm going to share. And this is certainly not all of the new annuals. We will link the page for that down below so you can check out all the brand new ones. And then we will be following up with a couple more videos to talk about perennials and shrubs that you can expect to maybe find this year at your garden center. So I did not order this list. Like, I didn't try to organize it in any specific way. I just picked out a bunch of the things that I loved in my garden last year. The first one being Supertunia Vista Snowdrift. So this plant, you guys, like, I didn't intentionally put it as the #1 plant, but it kind of is my #1 plant. We planted it here in our garden around the Red Point maples on the west side in that brand new garden, and Aaron encouraged me to plant light. He was like, you know what, I think we need to let plants grow to their full potential. We don't need to crowd things so much, which is my initial reaction always, is just to put like all the plants in, you know, I don't want to see any soil right from the very beginning. But this plant, you guys, they claimed that it grew about 2 feet tall and about 4 feet wide in the end, and it is absolutely true. 6 Supertunia Vista Snowdrifts around each one of those trees, which is a pretty good sized area, completely filled it in by the end of the season, and I planted those a little bit late. I think it was kind of June-ish when I got those in the ground. And then we planted those out at my parents' house as well, around some purple fountain grass in big containers. The containers are about like 3 by 3 squares. And I put 8 of them, which was overkill. I think I could have only put 4, and I think they would have been perfect, but they filled up. Like, they started to swallow that grass. The grass eventually took off and like it held its own against the Vista Snowdrift, but they grew up and then they just started cascading over, and by the end of the season they were reaching the very bottom of the containers, and we didn't skip a beat with blooms. Like, the blooms, you could hardly see any leaves, and it was just amazing. They also attract butterflies and hummingbirds, which is really fun to watch. So if you have them especially planted in mass like that, you can really see a pretty spectacular show, not only with blooms, but when you see butterflies coming around and all of that. It's kind of magical. So some of the key features of the Supertunia Vista Snowdrift is that it's great in both containers and the landscape, and I think we proved that by being able to plant it in both locations and kind of monitor its progress throughout the season. And if you find any Supertunia Vistas, that particular series as a whole, which Snowdrift is the first white one, which I was so excited about because I'm partial to white flowers. The rest are kind of more in the pink kind of line of things, like your Vista Bubblegum, Vista Silverberry, Vista Fuchsia. I mean, there's some beauties that we usually use every single year, but all of those are really well suited for in-ground landscape planting because they just take up so much space. So you have this one little 4-inch plant that just gets enormous really fast. They're also self-cleaning. You do not have to deadhead any Supertunia, not just the Vistas, any Supertunia. I don't even know why people buy regular petunias that have to be deadheaded. Why would you do that to yourself? #2 on my list is the Heart to Heart Scarlet Flame Caladium. This is such a unique looking plant, and there's so many good things about the Caladiums, the new ones that are coming out. I think there's 20-ish new ones coming out, and they're all beautiful. I chose the Scarlet Flame because I grew a lot of it last year. I didn't get my hands on it until a little bit later, but there are strappy leaves, red with speckled with pink and white, just really unique looking, and they bring such an interesting dynamic to a flower bed or container, and I planted them both ways. So I planted some up around our small Hebe fountain in the front yard, and then I also put some in a container near our back door, kitchen door, that gets pretty much no sun right there. And then I put them in another container, set of containers near our chicken coop, which got some filtered sun through the day. And they all did excellent. And the ones that were up by Hebe got overhead water. So I kind of wanted to put them through the paces and see what they would do here. I just always thought Caladiums were a strictly shade-loving plant. So when, you know, I heard about this new line coming out, I was like, well, you know, they're beautiful plants, but I'm going to be a little bit restricted on where I can put them and such. And some of them do still prefer a little bit of a shadier location, but there are a lot of them now that can be used in both full sun and full shade spots, like the Scarlet Flame. So I was really impressed with that. Now, this variety grows about 15 to 20 inches tall and 8 to 10 inches wide, which I really like because I think it makes for a great centerpiece plant because it gets taller than it does wide. I mean, 8 to 10 inches is a pretty narrow plant, so you can really tuck that in a lot of different places, window boxes, containers. I want to tuck it in between some ferns. You can do that in perennial areas. There's a variety called White Wonder. That's the one I want to put between my ferns. I did a little bit of it last year, and I just want to amp up that display because I think the contrast is so beautiful. I do think that they're going to be available both as bulbs and as pre-grown plants, but I think you'll find bulbs more often than the plants, and there'll be two different kind of groups of us planting them. There'll be us northern climate gardeners where our winters, typically, ours hasn't been super harsh this year, but typically we have harsher winters. It takes our soil a lot longer to warm up, and caladiums like to be in very warm soil. So for us, container growing might be a little bit more appropriate because the soil heats up faster in containers than it does in the ground, and they're less prone to like get into boggy soil situations because containers drain and they don't like to be sitting in water. But for those of you who live in southern climates where you have very mild winters, it's nice and warm and you've got humidity and all of that business, you will be able to grow them for quite a lot longer than us in the north. Number 3 on my list is Rockin Blue Suede Shoes Salvia, which I love the name of it, but what I did learn about this plant this past year, I planted a bunch of it in front of our gazebo. I learned that it absolutely grows as big as they say it's going to grow. So 30 to 40 inches tall, 24 to 30 inches wide, and it grows that big fast. I probably planted too many in front of the gazebo, but it was a gorgeous show. I mean, they were beautiful all season long, and what I really like about the way they look, the color of leaves, it's kind of a medium soft green, which I really do like, and I like the Rockin Plain the Blues as well, and that one looks kind of velvety almost. I just think they're a wonderful series, but the flowers, they're a little bit more open, like the whole bloom stalk is a little bit more open and spread out, and the blooms are this kind of clear, crisp blue, but the calyx that holds the petals on is so dark it's almost black. So even when the plant loses its petals, it still looks like it's in bloom, so you never really feel the need to deadhead, and I never deadheaded mine. I just let them go all season long, and they just got huge and enormous and bloomed the whole time. They are sterile, so they won't seed themselves around, and because they're not sending energy into producing seed, they will send that energy into just blooming their heads off all season long. And they can also take kind of poor soil. So if you have areas where you just have a hard time having things grow and flourish, this might be a really good option for you. Or if you have deer, this might be a good option because they are resistant. However, they do attract all the other pollinators. So if you want to put something awesome in your pollinator garden, put this plant because you will see hummingbirds, butterflies, and honeybees around it like crazy. It also bloomed from the second I put it in the ground because they had blooms on them even when they were in their little cans, and they bloomed all the way throughout the whole season until we had a hard frost. And if you want to trim these, which you absolutely can, you can trim them to kind of keep them in size, check a little bit if you want, but wherever you cut them, it makes them branch out and get even more full and more dense and more blooms. So you really can't go wrong with this one. Number 4 is the Lady Godiva Orange Calendula, which I haven't technically grown, but I grew the Lady Godiva Yellow this past year. I've showed it to you guys. We did a video about it. I think I've done several picture updates on Instagram. It's still blooming in our greenhouse. What is today? It's the middle of January and it's still blooming, and it's been blooming since I planted it last spring. So I'm super impressed with this particular variety. The only difference between that one and the orange is the different color of flowers. What I love about the way the flowers look is that they're almost fully double, and I like any double flower because they just look so like extra romantic and fluffy and beautiful to me, like delicate. And because they're almost fully double, it means that this plant will not set as many seeds as traditional calendula, so it won't spread itself around your garden space, which sometimes you don't mind that happening and you want things to spread and kind of grow and take over a space, and that's great, but sometimes you don't. Because I'm going to be putting these in a cut flower garden, which I may not do a cut flower garden in the space I'm planning to do it in this year, the following year, I want to have the option of like cleaning up that space and starting over and not worrying about a bunch of seedlings coming up. So I think there's a place for both the traditional varieties and this sort of double variety. They grow about 10 to 16 inches tall and 12 to 18 inches wide, and they bloom all the time. Resistant to deer, they attract the butterflies. They're just a really beautiful plant. Number 5 is the Supertunia Mini Vista Indigo, which is a Supertunia with a smaller flower, but they've moved it into the Vista series. They call it a Mini Vista because of how well it performs in the landscape and how vigorously they grow. So these ones will spread like 8 to, I just said these ones. These will spread 18 to 24 inches wide. And the color on these is just perfect, especially given the fact that this year's color is classic blue. These kind of fall right within that range. They kind of go from that really medium clear blue to kind of a purple color. I had some planted underneath our incredible hydrangeas kind of near our fireplace, and they just filled in gorgeous. I also popped a few Supertunia sky blue in there. So I had that light sky blue with the mini Vista Indigo, and it was just such a beautiful contrast. They both performed so well with each other, and they bloomed the entire season. So from the moment I planted them until really a hard frost, because that area is a little bit more protected under trees, so they last a little bit longer. And that's the other thing. This variety can take a little bit less sun. I mean, they perform the best in full sun, but they can also do kind of a part sun situation just fine. And just like all your other Supertunias, they're self-cleaning. They do not need to be deadheaded. Number 6 is the Suncredible Sunflower, which I enjoyed growing so much last year. We had it in 2 different spots. So it was right along our driveway, kind of backing a boxwood hedge. We planted a long hedge of it, and then we planted a grouping of them on the west side of our house, kind of at the end of our new brick walkway area. Both areas received pretty much full sun, which is what this plant prefers, and they just performed their heads off. They were always in bloom. They were bloomed from the moment I planted them, and they were this tall, to the moment they were like full size. So they say they grow like, I think 30 to 42-ish inches tall, and then up to maybe like 32 inches wide, which is absolutely true. I think I maybe even had some that were a little bit taller than that, because I could stand next to them. I'm like 5'4". I could stand next to them, and they were, you know, really like at eye level with me. And they were just loaded with flowers. They just kept pumping out the blooms all season long. And they are a little bit of a smaller sunflower size. You know, they're not like the big giant sunflowers. They're about 4-inch diameter flowers, really kind of clear, bright yellow with a dark center. You don't have to deadhead them in order for them to keep blooming. I never deadheaded mine because there were just too many of them. And that's why I appreciate flowers that don't look bad if you don't deadhead them, and these didn't. In fact, we showed you in a video, we did an update on how they looked, and I kind of left them, you know, because I wanted you to see what they look like if you just didn't touch them. The other thing about them is you don't have to fertilize them like you do other annuals. They do fine as long as you do like a controlled release fertilizer application when you plant them, and then you can do another one mid-season if you want to, but they're just one of those flowers that just keeps on performing even without it. They're also really versatile in different soil types, so you can of course put them in a nice rich soil or even average soil, and of course they're going to do really well, but they're really adaptable to crummy soils, and maybe even more dry areas. Once they're established, they can handle that a little bit better. So you've got a little versatility and kind of like elbow room there with your soil type. They also make for a really great cut flower. So I've got those planned for my cut garden as well, because I noticed that, you know, they branch out and they get so dense and full of flowers all over them, but their stems were long enough to where I didn't have to use them in really short vases. They had a long enough stem and a long enough vase life to make it a really great cut flower. The bees and butterflies also love them, and deer don't like them. So that's another good thing. And speaking of other varieties of annuals that don't need a ton of fertilizer, like our Suncredible Sunflowers, are the Pentas, which are also called Egyptian starflowers. I grew a variety, I actually grew 3 varieties. Sunstar Rose is the one I wanted to really talk about today, because I planted it in the ground near our gazebo in front of some vertigo pennisetum grass, and I just enjoyed that combination so much. The contrast was so beautiful, and it was the first time I had ever grown Pentas in my life. It was the first time I'd actually ever heard of Pentas in my life, because we don't grow them up here. They're not like a super common one that you find at garden centers. So I was so thrilled to try these out and have them work. I also grew one called Sunstar Lavender, Sunstar Pink. I grew those in containers. They did really well, but the Sunstar Rose in the ground, I don't know if it was just the location or if it was being planted in soil in the ground rather than in a container, but it did perform a little bit better for me. I don't know what the deal is with that, but they all bloomed, and the one in the ground just grew a little bit bigger, which this one grows 18 to 20 inches tall and 16 to 24 inches wide, and it bloomed from the second I put it in the ground until a frost, and it attracted a lot of pollinators, so bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds. And I did learn that Pentas are crazy heat tolerant, so they're a really good annual for those of you who garden in the South. The next one, number 8, is actually 2, but there are 2 different kinds of Superbells that I tried out last year that I really liked, and they're both doubles. So we have Superbells Double Amber and Superbells Double Blue. The Double Amber is truly this amber colored, it's beautiful. It's almost like a Supertunia honey. It's got that kind of vibe to it. It's like that kind of orangey yellow mustardy with a little bit of apricot in there, kind of like that blushy apricot pink kind of, I don't know, it's just really pretty. And the fact that they're double, again, I really like double flowers, and I felt like it went really well with the things I put it with. I put it with some other Superbells up in our front estate planters, and they grew really, really well. They grow about 6 to 12 inches tall, and they will trail up to about 30 inches. And then the Superbells Double Blue is just this beautiful deep blue double Superbells. Those for me grow better in containers. All Superbells do for me because they don't like to be bogged down with any water. So they like to be in a container where the water will kind of drain away quickly, and they like to even dry out slightly between waterings. So I'll typically put them kind of on their own. I don't do a whole lot of combination planters with Superbells, but when I plant them all together like that, they do really well. Number 9 is Superbena Sparkling Amethyst. And the reason I loved this one so much was the color, which I wrote down the way they describe it because it's so, I think it's so perfect. So it's clusters of amethyst purple flowers kissed with rosy purple centers, which, I mean, that's such a cute way to describe it. I love the colors because I like the purple and that kind of rosy pink color. But the other thing I love about it is the size of the blooms. They are massive. And I grew these both in containers and in the landscape, and I had great luck both ways. In fact, I think this is maybe the second year I've really tried Superbena out as like an in-ground planted annual, and I love it. And it's something I'll probably be doing more of because I was just amazed by the amount of blooms. I mean, especially on this one, it was just covering, like you have these huge blooms and they just cover the top of the leaves. You can hardly see the leaves. It's like all color. And then I put these in a container with Prince Tut in the center, and then the Superbena Sparkling Amethyst and Supertunia Bordeaux. And if you want a killer combination that's gorgeous all season, plant that one. It's so, so pretty. These also attract butterflies, and they're really, really mildew resistant, and they're just a really vigorous grower. So they grow 6 to 12 inches tall and about 18 to 30 inches wide. I want to say they grew maybe like 24 inches wide. I did plant them a little bit late, so I want to do some more testing this year in the ground to see if I can get them to grow up to that 30 inches because I think that would be really amazing. And they bloomed the entire season from the moment I planted them until a frost. Number 10 is Supertunia Raspberry Rush, and I thought that this was such a beautiful Supertunia because it's got a very different look than the other pink Supertunias that are out, which are all pretty, but this one has a very soft look to it. It's like a soft rosy raspberry pink, and then it's got these little like white cloud markings. It's not like a sharp white stripe, but it's just like this really soft and kind of irregular white markings, so that makes it look very interesting to look at. And like all other Supertunias, they are self-cleaning. You do not have to deadhead them. They grow about 6 to 12 inches tall, 30-inch spread, and they bloom all season long. They can also take a little bit of a light frost, so I find that my Supertunias can go a little bit longer into the season, and that's something I always take into account for certain areas in my garden where I just want to see a little bit more color a little bit longer. Number 11 is a little new series of Superbells that's coming out called the Tabletop series. I did show it to you guys last summer. They're just Superbells that stay more compact than your traditional varieties. So they grow about 4 to 8 inches tall and have a 10 to 16 inch spread. So they're great for tabletop arrangements, anything like smaller arrangements. They won't like trail all over the place where you're constantly having to maintain them and trim them. They just stay in this nice little tidy package. So you can use them in centerpiece arrangements, small window boxes, smaller size hanging baskets, because not everything is suited to live in those little hanging baskets. Superbells are by far one of the better ones because they do like their roots to dry out a tiny bit between waterings, and they don't like to sit in water, especially when you've got a smaller statured plant that's not utilizing as much water as one that's going to grow 30 inches long. I just think it's a really good option. These also have a super high bloom ratio. I mean, they usually just look like they're a mound of color, and you don't see very many leaves, which is really exciting. Self-cleaning, they bloom from when you plant them all the way through a light frost, and they do attract hummingbirds. Number 12 is one I think you'll be surprised I put on my list because the bloom color is kind of an orangish red, and I did grow it last year. It's called Heated Up Scarlet Gaillardia, and I just enjoyed that plant so much that I had to include it because it still has color on it in my greenhouse right now. What I did was I had all these plants. It got a little bit late in the season, and they were starting to get a little scraggly in their little, 4-inch cans, as plants do. I cut them back hard and then just popped them all in a big galvanized tub, and they just sprung forth and grew and bloomed, and they looked perfect in that galvanized container. Just the structure of the bloom, they kind of look like this like wildflower-esque, and they bloomed the entire season long after they kind of came back from their haircut, but they just looked perfectly suited for that container. And the fact that they still have some color on it, Benjamin actually was picking flowers off of it just like last week, is pretty amazing. Numbers 13 and 14 are both Coleus, but I wanted to give them each their own number because they're both really amazing plants. And I enjoyed growing them last year. We showed them to you in videos. I've talked about them quite a lot. Number 13 is called Colorblaze Wicked Witch. And this one, you guys, is killing it. Like, it's received like 15 or 16 top performer awards. There are trial gardens throughout the US and Canada where they trial out all these new varieties, and they kind of like judge all the new varieties coming out and decide which ones are doing the best and perform the best. And so this one has received a ton of awards, which is so awesome. And I loved it in our garden. The spot I loved it the best was in these big containers back by our formal garden. And I put it in there with lemony lace elderberries and some anemones. It was a really interesting mix. But the Wicked Witch has really big leaves that are kind of a dark chocolate burgundy color, really ruffled, like ruffly edges with chartreuse, like a chartreuse margin. So if you were to put this Coleus in more of a shaded area, the darkness of the leaves would maybe make you think that it would kind of sink into the background, like you wouldn't see it. But that amount of chartreuse green that's around the outside makes the whole plant like come alive and come forward. So I think just it was the right amount of color contrast, and it's a beautiful plant. Now these will grow quite big, like they grow 24 to 40 inches tall, 18 to 36 inches wide, and they truly do get that big, and they grow pretty fast. And you can prune them to kind of keep them in size check if you want to, and it's not a hard thing to do, but boy, if you let it grow to its full size, it's a pretty spectacular plant to see it at its maturity. I mean, they create these big trunks. They're just an amazingly beastly plant, and I love them in my garden. The other thing about the Colorblaze series is that they can take both sun or shade, which I used to think kind of along those same lines as Caladiums. I used to think, well, all Coleus kind of need a shadier spot, or maybe they could take a little sun, but just in the morning. But the Colorblaze can really take a lot of sun. And I've been kind of putting them through the rigors out in our high desert garden just to see how much sun they can take without, you know, the cloud cover and humidity, because we don't have that here. And they've been handling it really, really well. And now the next one, number 14, is the Colorblaze Wicked Hot Coleus. And while this one looks wildly different than the Wicked Witch, they both have some similarities in that they're both in the Colorblaze series. They can both handle sun and shade. They both get the same size, and they have both been bred to not bloom until really late in the season, if at all. Both of mine did not bloom this season, which was awesome, because I remember planting some other I don't even remember what varieties they were, but they would start blooming so early in the season, and then I was just kind of stuck. I had to keep deadheading these plants, and they would constantly put on blooms. Like, I swear I could have deadheaded them every single day. And we don't grow Coleus typically for the blooms. We grow them for their leaves and for the way their leaves look and the structure of the plant. So I love the fact that I don't have to worry about that. And it also helps make the plant look better through the season, because the plant is not focusing on setting flowers and setting seed. The Wicked Hot is, like, it's the perfect name. It's like a very orangish red, like clear orangey red Coleus. It just shines in the landscape. It has a ruffled leaf. The leaf is a little smaller than the Wicked Witch, but it creates this amazing impact planting. I planted it both in some containers along with some chocolate drop Coleus and Dichondra Silver Falls, and those planters, it's like they looked alive. You couldn't even see the planter anymore. I mean, these Coleus just got so massive. They were an amazing show. And then I put some Wicked Hot in the ground with some White Gomphrena and Supertunia Bordeaux, and the layering was really beautiful. I think I put like maybe 4 or 5 of those Coleus in that section, and they just filled it in great. And the Coleus is so wonderful to fill in areas, because the one area in the ground was more shaded, and then the ones in the containers got more sun. So it was nice to have that versatility and what it can handle light-wise. And the last one on my list, number 15, is an edible, because it's technically an annual, but it's called a Goodhearted Tomato. I've been growing the Garden Treasure and Garden Gem for the past few years and have really been happy with the performance of those tomatoes, but I was able to try out this cherry tomato last year, and I was really thrilled with its performance. More than its performance, I was thrilled with its size, because I think it addresses something that's like fits a need for some people. Like, it grows so compact, 8 to 12 inches tall, 12 to 18 inches wide. So it's like this little like itty bitty thing that you can put in containers and hanging baskets and window boxes. So for those of you who are doing more like urban gardening, when you're doing balcony, gardening or patio gardening, what an amazing plant to be able to tuck in and not have it get so big. It's a semi-determinate tomato, so it doesn't grow enormous like your indeterminate tomatoes. It doesn't need support, so you don't need to have a tomato cage or a staking system of any kind. I took a couple pictures of mine throughout the season last year just to show you guys, like, I think my tomato plant's gonna break. I mean, it is so full of tomatoes. It was crazy. And it keeps on bearing like all season long. It just needs consistent water, consistent fertilization, and it will just keep on performing. Now, if you're going to plant it in a container, I would probably recommend going at least 16 to 18 inch container just for enough room for, you know, moisture around the roots and all of that stuff. I think that's the perfect size, but you can go a little bit smaller and get away with it, especially if you've got like a good drip system or a good watering system in place. They also had kind of a sweet flavor to me and a really tender skin, which is important. Like I don't like to have a really tough skin on my cherry tomatoes, so I was really pleased with the texture of that. So anyway, that's it. That's my list of 15 new annuals that are coming out this year that I'm really excited about and that I really hope you guys give a try. Now, I don't know how available these are going to be because they are so brand new. I think the best thing to do is to talk with somebody at your local garden center, because I know, coming from that background, that we're at the mercy of what the growers are growing at the moment. So if you're the people at your local garden center know the varieties you're looking for, they can go to the growers and say, hey, are you going to be growing this? If not, can you? And they may also, in fact, I'm fairly certain they will be available online if you cannot find them at your local garden center. So we'll put all the information down below, and we will link to all of these plants so you can look up pictures and read up a little bit more about them if you want to. So anyway, thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and just chatting about plants. Perfect thing to do on a kind of dreary, windy winter day. We'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.